We will get started in just a second. Waiting for the party to log on. Okay. L'chaim, l'chaim. Someone's logged on, so I'm assuming we're live. Okay, mazel tov, mazel tov. It's a very great simcha, honor and privilege for me to address the Sheva Brachos. A bit delayed, both today, in the sense that we're supposed to go online at least 45 minutes ago, but also was supposed to be last night. But then again, this whole shidduch was a long time in the making, which is something which we're going to speak about tonight. Let me preface that, me and Tzvi, the Chassan, we go back longer than I could remember. And when I say longer than I can remember, I didn't just misspeak, and I'm not exaggerating. But by my memory, we know each other for about 15 years. But it seems that we know each other longer than that. Prior to when our relationship began, in my memory, I was once approached by a guy, a yeshiva guy in Geula, and he approached me and said hello. And immediately when you see a yeshiva guy in Geula, you don't recognize. You say, "Chaver, en li kesef," en li kesef, and you walk off. Then subsequently, I bumped into that guy at the Weinberg residence before the drinking commenced, and he explained that we actually know each other very well, and we had met by the Weinbergs previously and already had a few very meaningful conversations. Just that it seems that when we met initially, it was already Pikudei Su'uda, and for some reason, it's a phenomenon that's being studied world over, how events that happen at the Weinberg residence are, escape memory. It's something which they're researching world over. So it comes out that we actually know each other, had a few meaningful conversations even before my remembered, relationship with Tzvi. And we met many times at the Weinberg since. And after he went back to Chutzarts, we maintained correspondence by email. And then when I moved back to America, we collaborated, on certain projects and had many meaningful conversations. And Oda Yod Netuya Bezrat Hashem to do a lot of great things together and have a lot of great conversation. And again, more importantly, to do a lot of great projects together. So yes, so we know each other longer than I can remember in the most literal sense. I mean that literally. Anyways, I'd like to, have some reflections about, this shidduch. I had a thought, on the way back from the Chasana, driving back. It was such a beautiful wedding, and we were all waiting for this a long time. So I was wondering, it was such a beautiful event, what could possibly be better? The thought crossed my mind. Aside from the bar, of course, but bar is Elu Dvarim She'en Lahem Shiur. The bar could always be better, but that's true by any wedding. But I was thinking, about this shidduch, the beautiful event that there was that night, that beautiful chasana. What could have been better? And the thought occurred in my mind, seemingly what would have made the event better is we could, take the whole event, right? The hall, the band, right? All the attendees, everything, all the simcha, shove it all into a time machine, right? And just have the event a few years earlier, right? It would have saved a lot of people a lot of angst, I would think, right? Yeah, so that's a thought that occurred to me while I was driving. And then another thought, it was followed by another thought. And it was like this. We're reading Parshas Terumah, Binyan HaMishkan. And, a Yiddish marriage, a Bayis Tem B'Yisrael is a Mikdash Ma'at. Chazal say, Zachu Shechina Shruya Beineim. Right? It's, it's when there's, Shalom Bayis, there's Hashros Hashchina. So every Yiddish home, right, is a little Mishkan. And what does it say by the Mishkan? What do Chazal tell us? Very interesting thing. And it's a psikta, and I believe the Mishpur actually brings it, right? That all the kalim of the Mishkan, everything, it was all the pieces things that we're reading about in these parshas of Terumah Titzaveh, right? They were all ready by Chafei Kislev, right? Back then in the desert, right? It's ready already, Hanukkah time, but ultimately would be Hanukkah, many years later. And the Rebbe Shalom delayed. It's, Hakama, it's actually being put together, right? Till Nisan, for reasons that we're going to explain. Right? So I thought it's very interesting, that, building the Mishkan, it's two people could be, all the kelim were ready, and parallel to that, there could be two people that, think they're ready to get married, right? And it's, and they're in the parsha, and there's a delay, right? And there's a delay, and that delay is mukhrach. And I'm going to discuss that, why that is, that the Rebbe Shalom had to delay the Mishkan till Nisan. And it could also be in a person where a person builds his bias with Bat Zugo that was already, foretold, Arba'im Yom Korm Yetzias Avlad. There's a time, and the time is not necessarily when you, think you're ready for it, for reasons that I'm going to explain. So let's open up with a question. We're reading now these parshas of Hakamas HaMishkan, Terumah Titzaveh. Now we have Terumah Titzaveh, and we have VaYakheil Pikudei, for crying out loud, right? Total repetition, total. Rashi on VaYakheil Pikudei is very little Rashi because he explained it all in Terumah Titzaveh. Like, why do we need two whole detail? Everything's the same to a T. All the measurements, everything is repeated. Just the context changes, right? The context changes that, in Terumah Titzaveh, Hashem is telling Moshe when he's in the mountain, you're in heaven, right? This is how you're going to do it, and VaYakheil Pikudei talks about, and this is how they did it. That's the only thing that's different, right? Seemingly, right? We'll get back. Why the repetition? The whole most of VaYakheil Pikudei could all be one pasuk that they all did, and like Hashem told Moshe, it should be done, right? What do we need? The whole thing repeated again, right? Right, something, Davar Omer Dorsheni. Okay, so before we unravel this, so there's a Gemara in Brachos, Daf Nun Hey. Right, I'll say it outside for the sake of brevity. Right, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, tell Bitzalel, make Mishkan, Aron, and Kalim. Right, make the Mishkan, the tent, the structure, and then the Aron and Kalim that fill it. Right? And Moshe went and he was mahapech, right? And he switched it around. And he told Bitzalel, make Aron, Kalim, Mishkan. So Bitzalel says, Moshe, Benok Shvalim, a person makes the house, and he fills it with Kalim. Kalim Shaniosa, Hechanach Nisem, right? The Kalim, where am I going to put him? Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you it should be Mishkan, Aron, and Kalim, perhaps. And Moshe says, yeah, that's right. Your name is Bitzalel, Bitzel, Kel, so you're in the shadow of Hashem, right? That's a Gemara, which I'm sure many of you, maybe all of you, know, right? Beautiful Gemara. Makes no sense, right? Everything about the Gemara is very difficult from beginning to end. Rashi and Tosfos deal with some of the questions on the spot, all right? But, I'm going to raise a question that they don't raise, that you understand from the get-go. We cannot chas v'shalom imagine that Moshe Rabbeinu either misunderstood what Hashem told him, or even worse, b'mezid, right, would say something different than what Hashem told him, right? Because if Yala al-Adah, such a thing, we have no Judaism left. You realize you have no Judaism left, right? If we can't trust Moshe that he gave us the goods, right, exactly what he heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we've got no Judaism. Matter of fact, that is the eighth ikr of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. It is really that point, right? That, you could trust Moshe that he says exactly, right, what Hashem told him, right? So what does it mean? Hashem told him one thing and then he said something else. But as both, Rashi and Tosfos, each in their own way, point out, Moshe didn't lie. Moshe wasn't mahapech anything. What does it actually say in Parshas Terumah? We just read it. When after VaYakheil Terumah, what's the first thing the Torah describes to do? How to make the Oron. And then it describes how to make the other Kalim. And then it gets into Vesa Mishkan, Tas, Eser, Urios, right? How to build the Mishkan. That's exactly what Hashem told him. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't mahapech anything, right? Now, albeit, right, that in Parshas VaYakheil, right, this was the other difference we were alluding to. In Parshas VaYakheil, it indeed says that when they went about building the Mishkan, right, so they actually built the enclosure first, and then started making the made the Aron and the Kalim, right? Ma Pesher Adavar. So what we're saying is, in essence, what the Goin says in his Bir HaGodas, Bekitzer Nimratz, but it's an amazing message, very fundamental. And I'll show that it has to very much to do with our Chassan and this Shidduch. Right? Says the Goin like this. Right? I'm going to paraphrase because he says it in his very Bekitzer Lashon, rather cryptically, but you'll see that what I'm saying is Omek Kavanoso when you'll take a look in the Chidushei HaGoros and Brachos. Right? The Mishkan exists on multiple levels. It's transdimensional, right? And that's the sort of Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala, Mechuven Keneged Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata, right? There's a Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala that's totally aligned with Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata. Now, it doesn't mean totally aligned. They're Mechuven. Says Rav VaYakheil, right? They're really all in the same place. The Mishkan is the site of point center, right? The center is the center of all the different dimensions, right? Point center is common to all the different dimensions, all share the center. So it's the center of all the dimensions. It's the center of length, the center of width, right? Center of depth, and it's the center of all the other dimensions that we don't know. And that's the sort of the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash in every world beside Nekudas Americas. So there's an aspect of the Nekudas Americas that permeates our world. That's the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata. And there's the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala, and there's a Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala in every single world, all beside Nekudas Americas, right? The Beis HaMikdash is a trans-dimensional mitzias, right? That's what, and that's, of course, you understand the side of what Chazal count, Gemara in Psachim, that there are 6 things, or never comes out. One of them is Makom HaMikdash. Morom Merishon Makom Mikdashenu. Makom Mikdashenu. It's sort of the Nekudas Americas of the whole Bria, right? An amazing thing, right? There's a Beis HaMikdash in every world. That means that, the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata is a reflection or a shadow of the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala. Now, you need a Beis HaMikdash in every single world because the whole world, all the different universes, are there to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in Machshava and it's in Maisa, right? Now, what I mean by Machshava, that doesn't mean that you think before you do. I'm not talking about that Machshava. I'm talking about something much deeper, right? There's goals, there's ideals, there's values, right? The philosophers, Lahavdil, called it the world of ideas, right? There are values, right? And then there are actions, right? And you have to try to live your values. The values are all nitfas in machshava. They're values, they're ideas, they're concepts, virtuous concepts, right? Virtue, morality. These are all concepts, right? And, so there's the concept, and then there's how the physical reality has to mirror, or rather shadow those concepts, right? So so the Mikdash exists b'machshava in the world of ideas, right? And there's the Mikdash Shel Mata, where we do the physical avodah. We bring the korbanos, and we not just bring the korbanos. There's it's the makom of Malchus, Gamrian and Yeshua Ba'azar Malchei Beistar Bilvad. It's where the Sanhedrin sits. It's where the Lishkas HaGazis. a lot of that it's to bring all those values to life and to live those values, and that's the challenge of really the challenge of the Jewish people, who Akash was Mashra Shechina on, right? That we should bring the Shechina, bring the Torah, bring the Torah to earth, the values of the Torah. With the Torah comes the Shechina with it, as it says in Medrash and Parshas Terumah. Shechina came with the Torah, and hence we have a Beis HaMikdash to put all that ruchni koach into the world of Maisa. So says the Goin, right? Machshava and Maisa, they should literally shadow each other, meaning on one hand, follow each other, right? But it's Baha Kadisa. Sof Ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. They're kind of an inverse, right? Because in values, the first thing you have in mind is your end goal. What's my end goal? What's the tachlis, right? And then you figure, what's the goal? What am I living for, right? And that's what the Mesilas Yesharim opens up with. That the first thing a person has to know, Yesoda Chasid Shorosh Hador, is that she's Bar Sador Machos Ba'olamo. Know what you're living for, and you're living for Olam Haba, and that's the Sof Ma'aseh. That's b'machshava tchila. That based on that you align all your values. You should have values that are consistent with that goal, right? But that goal is what you attain at the end of a life of living by your values. So what's Sofa Maisa is b'machshava tchila, right? So the guy obviously is alluding to the idea that's also brought down in the Ramban, right? The tachlis of the Mishkan is the Oron, because that's v'no'arti Hashem. That's where Akash was mashur the Shechina, right? That's the tachlis. So Terumah Titzaveh, which the whole context is machshava, right? It's plans. Akash Baruch Hu's talking to Moshe, right? And he's explaining this is the way it has to be. These are the plans. This is the machshav of the Mishkan, and that's the ikar manifestation of the Mikdash Shel Mala in the world of ideas, right? Right. So the Aron is first because the tachlis, the Sof Maisa is b'machshava tchila, right? Right. So that's why the Aron is mentioned first, because that's the tachlis, right? Now Parshas Kisisa, the context is where they're building it on earth, right? So you get to the Sof Maisa, the tachlis, you get it at the end. So they started with the enclosure, and they get to the Aron later, right? Just the Aron comes before the other kelim because it's more chashuv. But you have first the enclosure, and then the kelim, which is where the ikra shras hashchina is, the Aron. You get to that later. Okay, so now you understand, what the Gemara means. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Moshe to tell Betzalo Parshas VaYakheil, and Rashi basically says this right there on the spot. If you read carefully, Moshe was supposed to give Betzalo Parshas VaYakheil, right? Because Betzalo's in charge of building it on earth. But Moshe Rabbeinu, doesn't just want to give VaYakheil. He doesn't just want to give VaYakheil because he doesn't want Betzalo to think he's just building something on earth. He wants to know that what's on earth is going to, live out and put into physical reality and put into Maisa the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mala, the concept of the Beis HaMikdash, right? He wants, the concept to be embodied, within. He wants Betzalel to be aware of the Mikdash Shel Mala, right? That that the tachlis is the Oron, right? Which is the Torah, which is where the Ikra Shras Hashchina is, right? He wants Betzalel to be aware that what he's building on earth is multidimensional, right? So that's why he tells him Parshas Terumah, right? So now, by the way, we explained already. Now you understand why there are two separate parshas, because they're really two separate universes. Terumah Titzaveh is the divrei Torah of the Mikdash Shel Mala, the Mikdash of ideas, which has a real effect on Klal Yisrael because we're transdimensional, right? We have a neshama that's more in heaven than it's on earth. Just to say tachton neshama is in guf. We have a neshama that ties into Shemayim, that has dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have the, Rav Hutner paraphrase from Yehuda Halevi. I don't remember the original phrase from Rav Yehuda Halevi, but Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, right? That's the side, of Terumah Titzaveh. It's the Mikdash Shel Mala that's shochen v'shachanti b'socham, literally, the Mishkan that we carry in our heart. It's our goals, it's our ideals, which is the Bechina of Hashras Hashchin that's inside of us. Right? It's our goals and ideals that we're aligned to, right? And then there's the Mishkan on earth, right? The Mishkan on earth is, that's, and of course, Shleimus is that the Mishkan Shomala gets a place on earth, but they're inverses, right? The Machshava and the Maisa. And that's what, when Betzalel figures out that, in Lamaisa, it's going to have to be Mishkan, Aron, and Kalim. What say, Betzelka, you are in Hashem's shadow. What's the shadow? What's a shadow? So try this at home. Don't do it right now at the show, Brachos. Okay, try this at home. When at night, if you can't fall asleep, you'll shine a light, make a shadow, do a shadow show. Raise your right arm. Right, I just saw it on a reflection of my own screen. Right, you raise your right arm. What does your shadow raise? The left arm. The Machshava and the Maisa should follow the Machshava, but it follows it like a shadow. It follows it, but in the inverse. Because Sof Maisa Machshava Tchila. But Tzelka, you figured out your function, that you have to do the Mishkan on earth, right? But you also figured out it's a shadow of the Mikdash Shomala, the Mikdash of ideas that we carry in our heart, right? The Mishkan, as a word, a Mishkan of, the Mishkan Shomala is like the Neshama, and the Mishkan Shomata is the Guf, that Neshama has to go into, converge with. Okay? So now here's the thing. Once we understand this, you can understand, why there's a time delay, right? And I'm going to explain this, right? That, the merger between Machshava and Maisa is not an easy one. It's not easy, right? As we say, the spirit is strong, the flesh is weak. And Lahavdil, by the Ummah Sa'ilam, they've also said in their philosophy, right, that, the world of ideas is the ideal world, and physical reality struggles to keep up, right? Okay, so now let's go deeper into this, right? We find in the Bria itself, Ola b'machshava liboros b'midas adin, rosh miskayim shitva mi'israchim ubros. There's Ola b'machshava, which is the goals and ideals, and that's din, right? Because concepts have to be very well rigidly defined. Values have to be very well rigidly defined, right? That's why Ola b'machshava is bedin, right? Now, Shita Midas Rachim Ubra is the emergence of physical reality. You got to add a little bit of flexibility. You got to add Midas Rachim, a little bit of flexibility, because, the Chomer is not, not so compliant. It's a little bit lazy, lags behind. And that was even before Chet Adam Rishon. I'm going to get to that in a second. As even before Chet Adam Rishon, Shita Midas Rachim Ubra, right? You got to give lag time, some flexibility, because physical reality just is not the ideal world. We are struggling to make it the ideal world and to imprint the world of ideas, which is strict din, rigidly defined principles and values, to, put it into physical reality. That's the struggle we're doing. And, to be realistic, you got to, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of patience. So what does Tosfos say? On Daf Chav Zayin. All right, so very interesting Tosfos. So Tosfos says that, they asked Rabbi Elazar Kalir, right? I was discussing Rabbi Elazar Kalir with Rav Chayer Holzer, who Tzvi introduced me with years ago, and since we've collaborated and published things together. So we're sitting together, we're discussing Rabbi Elazar Kalir, because Chayer Holzer is doing work on Slichus. So we were discussing, that Tosfos. So the Tosfos asked that Rabbi Elazar Kalir, in his piyutim for Nisan, goes with Rabbi Yeshua, B'Nisan Nivrolam. And his piyutim for Tishrei, he goes with Rabbi Elazar. That Tishrei Nivrolam. Hey, he's like a politician playing both sides of the arguments, right? Right? He wants clean energy, right? But he's not banning fracking, right? He's going with both sides of the argument, ki'ilu, right? All right. All right. Okay. You're going to lose your minutes. All right. We'll wrap it up. Okay. So let me just say, right? So Rabbeinu Tam says that Eo Velo Divro Kim Chaim, right? That betishrei ola b'machshava, and that's why Tishrei is a month of din. V'lo nivra ela ad Nisan, which is a month of rachamim, right? So Rabbi Yotam himself sets up that betishrei, b'machshava, which is a zman of din, and b'Nisan is b'rachamim, right? It needs time. It needs time. It needs time. If you want to make your ideals into lamaisa, right? That's part of the Shiddur Midas Rachman. It takes time because it's an intense process. All right. So two more points, and then I'm going to roast Tzvi a little bit. All right. The one point is that what's the Gemara saying? Brachos Daf Yud Zayin. Riboshim ritzonenu lasos ritzoncha. Mi ma'akev social shiva malchus. Riboshim. Our ideas. We want to do what you want. We're with you, Riboshim. We're with you. We're with you. But what gets in the way? The source of Shiva Malchus, and therefore Lamaisa, it doesn't emerge. We don't live our values because of the source of Shiva Malchus. So what's in between Terumah and Titzaveh and VaYakheil Pikudei? What's in between? Cheta Ego, which we know restored the Eitzar inside of us after Pascha Zuamasim by Mamed Ar Sinai. Right? So it's Niflamod. Cheta Ego is in between Terumah, Titzaveh, and VaYakheil Pikudei. That's the source of Shiva Malchus that's in between. So now this is the difference between Adar and Nisan. Of we delayed everything to Nisan, which is the month of Rachamim. Shir Midas Rachamim. So it was from Chafei Kislev till Nisan, and that's also the difference between Adar and Nisan. And Adar is when we read Terumah Titzaveh, it's a renewal of the Mishkan in the heart. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, kimu mashkiblu. They re-accepted their values. They re-accepted, and they accepted all the values. They were learning Kachim also. When the Haman came to pick up Mordechai for the ride, he was showing the halachas of Kmitza. They re-accepted all the values, including the mitzvahs that they can't be Makayim. They were there in heart. That's the kimu v'kiblu. That's the Mishkan of the heart. That's Terumah Titzaveh. That right after that comes Purim. Right? It's the renewal of the Mishkan in the heart. And by the way, that's what I heard from my Rebbe Moshe Shapiro, that there was a lishka called Shushan Abir and Bai Sheni. So there's the Pashib Shah because they had to have an engraving of Shushan Abir to never forget about Paras because they didn't want them to rebel against Paras when they initially rebuilt the base Midrash, but they stuck with it even after Paras fell. And my Rebbe said because the whole Beis HaMikdash Hasheni was built Mikoach Purim, and that's what they had to remember. Shushan Abir, whatever happened in Shushan is what built the Beis HaMikdash. It was the renewal of the Beis HaMikdash in the heart. But still, it's Akati Avach Shoshan. It's only in Machshava. That's why we don't say Halom Purim. But VaYakheil Pikudei is in Nisan. That's where the Gula Bipal, in Maisa. Okay. Now, give me 2 minutes to roast Tzvi a little bit because he deserves it. Okay. So now, as we all know, Tzvi is a man of uncompromising, rigidly defined values and principles. Or in layman's terms, sometimes could be a major pain in the butt, right? He sticks to his principles, and particularly when it came to Shidduchim, we had some very heated discussions, like Tzvi, you got to, Nechos Dar going to save Itita, you got to loosen up. We had some very animated discussions about this, right? And what didn't sound philosophical like the way we're talking now. But he stuck to his guns, Kol HaKavod, right? Because Tzvi is a very, very principled man, and he has very, very rigidly, in a good way, rigidly defined, really, all of them are Boros Midas Adin, very rigidly defined principles that he's thought out and he really believes in, right? Kol HaKavod. But the amazing thing about Tzvi, right, is that he's also a man of Maisa, which is very hard to do. Generally, very principled people do one thing. They complain. They just complain because the world is not ideal like they would want it to be, and they don't actually do anything. The practical people are the ones who have no ideals, right? They got no scruples, and that's why they get things done, right? And the great challenge of Jewish life is to merge the two, the machshava, the discipline, the ideas, and the maisa, right? And that's something which is very unique about Tzvi, heavy ratz Tzvi, right? I heard from my Rebbe Moshe Shapiro that the ratz is the shorsh of ratzon. So his ritzonenu lasos ritzoncha is mamish a driving force, and he goes lemaisa, right? So he saw injustice about the Chodesh Hashanah issue, and he wrote a book on it, right? He saw that the Batei Dinim need some tikkun, and he conceived of a plan that we will yet do. We'll keep trying. It got delayed because the tikkun of putting things lemaisa, is a hard tikkun and takes time, as we're saying. So we will yet make that basin that he wants to make. Right, and the kahena, his involvement with high medical resource, he sees a need. And he lives in an ideal world. He lives in an ideal world, but he is stubborn to, as long as it'll take, right, he's going to put it into Lemaisa. And I have to say, I know from speaking to him, he wanted a very particular bat zug that wants to live by his ideals. You want to live like that, you're going to have to spend the time to find it, right? If you want to put your ideals into Lemaisa, part of the Shita Meisrachim is that you got to be willing to take time. And he waited out and he got what he wanted. Chazak, because I know he's uncompromising. So he must have gotten what he wanted, right? And this is an amazing thing. Now, because you guys are about to lose your minion, right? So I'm not going to say some stories about how Tzvi saved my life, unless you tell me to, right? There's a lot of things I could say about him, l'shevach, right? When I, this course of his involvement with Chaya Medical Resource, right? He saved my life, in his words. Rabbi, my wife, when no one knew what was going on with me, and I was in Sakona Gdola, my wife said on an Erev Shabbos, having called Tzvi Frankel. He knows medicine. He knows about medicine, and he saved my life. But he wanted to put me in the hospital like minutes before Shabbos. I was very reluctant, as was Hatzalah to take me there, right? And Tzvi just said one thing that, scared the hell out of me, that made me compliant to go, and a good thing I did, right, was, if you don't listen to me by after Shabbos, you'll have to learn from an art scroll for the rest of your life. Oh, okay. Whoa. I'm not going to have that happen to my brain, really. And he said, Baruch Shem, so, there's a lot I could say about his, that he is an idealist and yet a very successful activist, and he'll put in the time to get exactly what he wants, right? Tzvi, I know you got the woman that you want, but go easy on her, right? And patience, right? And you will undoubtedly, she'll be your partner, right? Isha Kshera Osa Ratzon. He is the Ratzon and the ideals, and she is the Asiya, right? Beside Ishta Kegufo, Neshama Guf, ideals, action, right? That, Hazivu Gyala Yafe, Bebinyan Adeyad, and if he was good the way he was in having ideals and putting those ideas into Maisa, right? When he was single, when he was only Plag Gufa, Kavachomer nowadays in Odom Hashom and Tzelem Shalom, and Be'ezhem, from this couple, Am Yisrael is going to see a lot of benefit, right? Mazel Tov, Yashazvig Yal Yafe being Adeyad. All right, I hope you still have a minion. Mazel Tov again, right? Kol Tov and Tzvi, keep in touch. We're going to do that Bezdin. Is Rabbi Frankel there? I'm sure he wants to do it again. Okay, Kol Tov.